Discipline is freedom. We've all heard it, but what if discipline misapplied is actually keeping you stuck? Today's guest, Craig Ballantyne, is a performance coach, entrepreneur, and author of The Dark Side of Discipline, a book that flips everything we think we know about success on its head. He's helped thousands of men break free from burnout, fix their marriages, and build lives that actually work. Craig, welcome to the show.
This is going to be a lot of fun.
Awesome, mate. Craig, most guys believe that if they just grind harder, everything will fall into place. How does the dark side of discipline, how does that destroy men instead of helping them?
Yeah, so everybody's heard the phrase, 2 wrongs don't make a right. Well, if we flip it, and you can actually find that 20 good things can make a wrong. And what I mean is discipline is a double-edged sword. For me, it was a lifesaver. It got me out of binge drinking, and it helped me overcome my social anxiety. It helped me stop being an introvert. However, I took it too far. I took it too far in exercise streaks and rigidity around my structure and my schedule that stopped me from doing things more important because I had these discipline routines to maintain. And I see this in a lot of friends of mine. And some of them have gone so far on the dark side that they've gone and chased all these challenges. They see all these things on the internet that they have to add another cold plunge to their routine, that they have to exercise twice a day, read a book a week, drink a green juice. All these things is like, it just takes up so much time away from what really matters. And so the biggest lesson of the book, or one of the biggest lessons, there's a few of them, is that you really need to run your own race. In terms of discipline, you need to figure out where your finish line is and then chart your own path and run your own darn race and forget about everybody else instead of following the crowd. Now, you can do cold plunges and work out twice a day if it fits and doesn't take away from what really matters, your marriage, your family, your career, your purpose. But don't let those things get in the way. And that's the thing, is like some guys and some women too, take it too far and sacrifice what really matters to impress no one that doesn't.
Huge. And on that note, if we just go one level deeper, have you seen that play out obviously you've been in this space like 20 years in business coaching, and you've been in this space a long time. Have you seen, how much of the other side have you seen, and how confronting is it?
Well, one of my really good friends was the inspiration for the book, and I talk about him at the start of the book. There's a couple guys who had a similar path, so there's some, it's kind of like a blended individual. But this guy had it all. I mean, he was married to a great lady with a couple of great kids and very successful business, millions of dollars in the bank and beautiful home and fancy red sports car. Like, you would just look at the guy and go, has it all. But then he, stumbles across some people on the internet who say, oh, you're not disciplined because you haven't done this challenge of X number of things for X length of time. And whether it's 100 push-ups in 100 days or whatever else, like, all these things are so random and arbitrary. Like, there's somebody else's race and he decided to go and run it, and he got away from his own race in life. And after he had finished a couple of challenges, his wife said to him, all you do is you spend half your time doing those things and half your time with your head buried in your phone for your business, and no time on us. See you later. And when I found out, it's not my marriage, but I was devastated because it was a friend of mine. It was somebody I looked up to. I mean, I thought this guy had the world in the palm of his hand, and he threw it all away for nothing. And that, man, and I see various levels of it. Obviously, that's like one of the most extreme. But I see various levels of it from people who, Fitness Business Summit, my friend Bedros Keuilian, he had, so Dan Henderson's very successful in the fitness, business space in your area. And Bedros Keuilian is the American version of Dan Henderson. And he had this event called Fitness Business Summit that I spoke at for about 10 years. And we had up to like 750 people in the audience every year. And I'd look out and every year I'd see the same personal trainers in the same seats. And I'd look at it and I'd go, oh, there's John. He's, this year he's 8% body fat and has $8 in his bank account. And he would spend the entire weekend learning sales and marketing. But then he'd also talk to the other trainers about workouts and nutrition during the breaks. And he'd go home, and instead of applying the sales and marketing, he would apply the workouts and nutrition. And he'd come back next year at 7% body fat. Hey, great. He lost percent body fat, but he'd come back with $7 in his bank account. You know, he was putting a level 10 effort. And this is another major lesson that I teach in the book, leading to the true definition, the ultimate definition of discipline, which I'll share with you in a second. But this guy, all these trainers, they were putting a level 10 effort into their level 1 problem. You know, they were putting a level 10 effort into their fitness and nutrition and body fat percentage, which didn't need to improve. I mean, they could have put a level 1 effort into it and they would have been maybe 9% body fat the next year, but still amazing. And they were putting a level 1 effort into their level 10 problem, which was building the confidence to do the sales and marketing, to grow their business and impact more of their community. And they avoided that.
Yeah.
So what we decided, Rich, was the ultimate definition of discipline is simple. It's not about doing hard things. You know, people say, oh, I'm doing hard things, you know, I'm cold showers. No, that's not discipline at all. The ultimate definition of discipline is identifying your level 10 problem in life, whether this is your marriage, whether this is pornography, whether this is alcohol, whether this is you just watch too much Netflix, whether you're overweight, whether you're on the verge of a heart attack, whether you have financial problems, whether you have business partner problems, whatever your level 10 problem is, the ultimate definition of discipline is putting a level 10 effort into your level 10 problem, and everything else is just entertainment. And it's a perverse form of procrastination in many cases where, you know, I had this one guy following me and he wanted to do business coaching with me, and I would check out his stories from time to time. And he didn't sign up for business coaching with us. And I saw he was always cold plunging at 5 a.m. and like, you know, making a big deal about it. You know, this is getting me mentally tough. And I followed up with him. I said, hey, you ever find the coaching you were looking for? He's like, no, man, ran into some financial hardships. Like the cold plunging does not solve anything. And he was using that as a perverse form of procrastination to do what really mattered, which was figure out his darn business. And I see this all the time from everything from like, you know, people go and start triathlon training rather than sitting down with their partner for a 2-hour difficult discussion on why the marriage is failing, you know, and whatever it is, you know, build a man cave so you can go and watch footy or whatever it is, so you can avoid the difficult discussion with your wife of 15 years that's now really more of a roommate, and all you really do is shuttle the kids around and split the duties there. You're both Uber drivers and you live in the same house, but there's no spark in the marriage. Well, what level of effort are you putting into that? And most people put a level 1 into that level 10 problem, and it breaks my heart because I didn't grow up in a great home, and I grew up wanting to be one of those TV dads that you saw in the 1950s and 60s. You know, with families like that. And so I'm sure that you and I have a lot in common about how we want to uphold families and help people have strong marriages and really focus on what matters.
I love that. Thanks for sharing. On that, like, what's the first step to getting that effort aligned with what actually matters? What's the first step for the guys who are in that predicament of, you know what, they're putting the wrong level in the wrong problem? Like, what's the first step for them?
That's a great question. And so the very first thing you have to do is you have to get very specific about what the problem is, right? Like we can sit there and someone can come to you, Rich, and say, I want to improve my marriage. But if you had 1,000 guys come to you and say, I want to improve my marriage, it's a general statement. It can mean 1,000 different things. So let's get very specific. When you say you want to improve your marriage, Andrew, what does that mean? Does that mean that you want to have date nights every week? Okay, great. Or you have date nights every week, but they're really crappy date nights and you want to improve the date nights every week. Or you want to stop fighting 3 times per week or whatever it is. Be very specific. Get that specific definition of success, because that is often what is missing. When people come to me and say, I want to get more disciplined, I need to know what they mean by that, because I can't build them a blueprint until I know specifically what they mean. So we got to get granular with that level 10 problem. And then once we know that, it's simply a matter of reverse engineering. If that's what we want to achieve, how would one achieve it? What would one do to achieve that? And you use there's a guy named Charlie Munger there was a guy named Charlie Munger, and he had this thing called, the inverse way of looking at a problem. If you wanted to make sure that your marriage failed, right? Most guys don't. They want to make sure their marriage succeeds. But okay, great. So here's a plan to make your marriage succeed. But let's flip it around. What would guarantee that your marriage failed? Well, if I continued to drink 2 or 3 nights a week with the boys after rugby practice or whatever, that I, didn't go to our daughter's dance recitals and, upset my wife. That would definitely make sure the marriage failed. That I wasn't home on time for dinner, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or whatever it is that your wife wants you home, and make a list of all the things not to do, and then make sure you don't do them. So it's figuring out what the heck the level 10 problem is. And then it's relatively easy to see what would look like a level 10 effort and what would look like a level 1 effort. Don't do the level 1 effort and do more of the things that align with the level 10 effort. And then to go one step further, it's because to put a level 10 effort into something obviously is a great commitment. And that means stopping certain other things. And this is where you have to look at the other side of the coin, which is, where am I a wild horse in life? And we use that phrase in the book as a wild horse is the type of person who's out there putting a level, 7, 8, 9, 10 effort into a level 1, 2, 3 problem. Meaning, like the personal trainer I talked about before, they're at 8% body fat. They have a level 0 problem in terms of body fat. And yet they probably spend 9 or 12 hours in the gym every week. So they're putting a level 10 effort into their level 0 problem. But if their marriage is failing, they need to cut that back to, going to the gym maybe 2 or 3 times per week. And if their body fat creeps up to 11%, whoa, you're going to be okay because you're not going to divorce court. So, just consider it a win. And listen, I'm not saying that you can't have it all. I'm saying that you need to focus on what really matters. And I'm a big believer in the 80-20 principle. And if your audience doesn't know what the 80-20 principle is, it's also known as Pareto's principle or Pareto's law. And what it says is 80% of your results come from 20% of your efforts. 80% of your results come from 20% of your efforts. And that goes for in the gym. That goes for in your business. That goes also for the flip side, the negative. 80% of your problems in life come from 20% of the people. 80% of the customer complaints that you get come from 20% of your customers, and so on and so forth. And it breaks down like that. And so you can still achieve fitness success. You can still achieve business success if you cut back on those things a little bit, because if you 80-20 your business, if you 80-20 your fitness program, most people are doing a lot of fluff in both of those things. I go to a public gym here, and the amount of texting by people of all ages between sets, and while they're doing sets, is unbelievable.
It's impressive.
Sitting on the leg extension or leg curl, like texting and doing your set, like men and women of all ages. Like, listen, just stop. Leave. And so it's a holistic approach. Cut the stuff that doesn't matter and focus on what does.
Yeah, for sure. I love that. For yourself, Craig, I know you've had great structure for a long period of time, and that's, I guess, one of your core principles. How has that changed, and how has that evolved since fatherhood and now being a father of 3? How's that evolved for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so there's a guy named Naval Ravikant who's a famous Silicon Valley investor and a very rich man. And he says, before you can write the book, you have to live the book. So I've lived the dark side of discipline. I've had 1,000-day exercise streaks that I didn't want to break. And I worked out in weird places and, missed out on social events because I had to exercise. I didn't want to lose my streak. So I did a lot of, I've lived on the dark side of discipline. I don't want people to go there because it's a waste of time. And so what I've done is I've really stepped back and I've thought about 3 things, which is, what's my big why in life? And for me, my big why in life is everything for my family. I'm an old dad. I didn't get married till late. I didn't have kids till late. I don't miss a bedtime. I don't miss a bath time. I don't miss a breakfast. I hardly miss anything. I work right beside my kids' play area. So I see them almost all day long, except for when I go to the gym for a short time. So everything is for my family. And if everything is for my family, that's my new filter. That's my new filter. That's the most important filter. And whether people think I'm soft or whether people think that, I'm not the person I used to be, I don't care. because all I care about is everything for my family. And also the next thing, so there's three things. One is the big why, your big why. What's really driving you? What's your mission, purpose, vision, or mission and purpose for your life? And, your mission can be outside of family. Like if somebody here happens to be single and, isn't married yet, or was married and is no longer married, and their mission is like Tom's shoes, every pair of shoes I sell, I'm going to give away a pair of shoes to a child in Africa. Great. That's the mission that drives that. It's a big why that drives that. But having that purpose is very important to figure out what matters and what doesn't. The second thing is creating a perfect life vision. So every man, what I would like you to do is sit down and write from the future, go 3 years into the future, and then write me the movie script of your life, so that when I read the movie script, I can see the movie play out of what your life is going to look like in 3 years from now, what you have accomplished. When you write the script, you write it as though you have accomplished it. And I've done this before, and I've achieved things like 3 months. The first time I ever did this, I set a 5-year vision, and I achieved exactly what I wanted and more 5 years, 3 months, and 17 days later. It's crazy. And so tell me, what street do you live on? What's your house look like? What cars are you driving? What's your relationship with your wife? What do you do with her in terms of date nights? How many kids do you have? What do your kids do? What are your kids into? Where do they go to school? What do you do for vacations? What do you do for recreation? How much do you work? What don't you do? What do you avoid? All that stuff. Give me the movie. Let me see the movie. And I want to see this great movie. So now you've got this vision, which is the North Star that keeps you on the straight line to success. And then the third thing is back to that specific definition of success for a specific goal. Short-term, specific definition of success. If you want to improve your marriage, what do you mean specifically by that? Because Rich and I can't help you if you just say, I want to improve my marriage. Well, great. Kiss your wife on the forehead. Like, I don't know. Does that improve your marriage? Like, maybe it does for some guys, but for most guys, it won't. You want to be more disciplined? What does that even mean to you? Because, I had a call today with a lady who's, it was a great call. It was a great podcast because she didn't know who I was. I was introduced to her by a friend. And not only did she not know who I was, but she actually really liked, the dark side of discipline. She liked doing all the things that I said don't do. And it wasn't a debate, but she did ask some really tough questions. And she said, I want to be more disciplined. And I'm like, what does that mean? And she couldn't answer it, and she couldn't really describe discipline. Nobody's ever really thought about it, but it has to really mean something to you. So after you got your vision done, and after you've got your big why, you have that specific definition of success. And I know exactly what matters and what doesn't, and I can cut the fluff. And, so that's it for me. And so I still live a life that would seem very extreme to the average person, to the bloke down at the pub who's, 40 pounds overweight and drinks and watches TV and doesn't talk to his wife, unless it's, about what's for dinner. He would look at me and go, I'm insane. And I might be. It's possible. I am Canadian. And so, I still get up at 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning because I want my quiet work time. And I work till 6. Then the kids get up and it's kind of crazy for a couple hours. Then we have nannies that come in from 8 till 5. And I do another work block right beside the kids. They interrupt me a lot, but that's fine. Then I go to the gym. I exercise every day, but exercise might be an hour and a half walk. Otherwise, it's 3 or 4 times, walk to the gym, work out, walk home. Shorter workouts than, when I was 28 and, benching 120 kilos, but whatever. I'm not the same guy. And so, and then we go to bed really early, from 4 until 7:30 is family time. And, we're asleep probably before 7:45 most nights. And, that's a pretty weird lifestyle to most people, but it just is the absolute perfect lifestyle for me right now. We're just so happy with it and having a lot of fun. And again, our 3 kids are under 3 years old.
Yeah. I love that. With that, Craig, and I guess this is probably like more of a personal question for me. For you to, and I'm in a very similar position. My day is quite similar to yourself as well. And my work situation is very similar to yourself. How do you go about wearing the two hats almost? How do you go about being direct Craig, masculine energy Craig, who's getting stuff done, who's crushing it at work, and then all of a sudden he's outside playing with his kids? Like, how do you make that switch multiple times per day? Is there a secret sauce to that?
I don't actually switch because it is all the same thing. It's this. I'm the same person in both situations. Whether I'm speaking with you, I'm trying to bring information and entertainment to your audience. And when I'm with my kids, I'm really bringing information and entertainment to my kids. And the only time where there's trouble is I get a little too locked on and focused to something. So rationally, if I'm writing an email to somebody and my kid says, "Hey, come here and do something," or, I need to help them. Rationally, I would stop writing the email and I'd go and do it. But I'm just so focused. And it's funny, we see it in our daughter too. Like you have to call her name 8 times before she says anything. And I'm the same thing. My wife will say, "Hey, I'm talking to you." I'm like, "Oh, I didn't. Hello." And so the only trouble that I have in my day is that sometimes my brain insists on finishing something that doesn't need to be finished when I could go and just do the thing and come back to it. But other than that, I mean, it's honestly pretty amazing that, they play and then I jump in and play with them. And, we had our kids in Mexico. And we lived there for a couple of years with Spanish nannies. And then when we moved back to Vancouver, which is where I live now, we only hired Spanish nannies here. So they're actually, the 3-year-old is perfectly bilingual and can switch like a light switch. It's unbelievable. And, honestly, sometimes she'd rather play with them than play with me. So I'm interrupting her almost as much as she's interrupting me.
I love that. Yeah. One of my favorite ideas from the book is standards eat discipline for breakfast.
Thank you. I was pretty happy when I came up with that one.
Can you explain why standards create effortless success and how guys can start setting them from today onwards?
Yeah, so we kind of made this little pyramid in the book of peak performance, and we put motivation at the top because it's like the icing on the cake. It doesn't really do anything for you long term, but it's nice to get motivated and hear a Tony Robbins speech or some Ed Milet or watch your favorite motivational video on YouTube. But it's not going to last, and it's not going to result in long term change. Then we talk about putting challenges underneath, and challenges. I don't like them because I think that they're a general approach to solving specific problems, and that's not the best way of doing it. But they are a lifeline to some people because, back in the day, my first business was a fitness business like yours, and we ran these transformation contest challenges. And for some people, it was a lifeline, right? Like they were on the verge of death with obesity and a lot of problems. And we were able to give them a lifeline, which showed them better habits. But most people aren't like that. Most people are doing pretty good already and want to go to the next level. And a challenge actually can take them in the wrong direction. So we have motivation, then challenges, then discipline. And discipline is really like willpower. Discipline is not that sustainable. And then we get into the 3 levels that matter. Systems, effortless discipline systems. So we talk a lot in the book about setting up systems that make the bad habit almost impossible to do, and the good habit, we grease the groove so it makes it almost impossible not to do. You can do that through systems. Great. So you can actually, stop porn, you can stop drinking, you can stop Netflix pretty effortlessly if you put the right systems in place. Then underneath that, once you got the systems in place and you start building your confidence, you start to shift your identity. And this is the most important concept, in my opinion, from James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, when he talked about how valuable shifting your identity was. Because if you shift your identity, as I have done many times in my life, for example, in November of 2021, I stopped drinking completely, and I'm not a drinker. So it used to be I was a social drinker. That was my identity. I'm a social drinker. I drink infrequently, like maybe 1 or 2 drinks a month, but when I was still drinking a little bit. So I was, I guess if I had to label myself, I'd label myself a social drinker. But now I'm not a drinker. And so I'm not tempted by alcohol. I'm just not a drinker. I've told everybody, millions of people on podcasts and books, etc., I don't drink. So therefore, the idea of drinking requires no discipline to fight off. And so your identity is then elevated into these standards. And standards are essentially like a code for you for living. Like you're like a computer, essentially. Like, I'm an honorable man. I'm a family man. I'm a great husband. I'm a great father. These are the standards that I have for myself. And therefore, when, an old college buddy comes along and says, "Hey, let's go to Vegas one more time." No, that's clearly not something that I do. It's outside of my standards. So no, thank you. But I avoid the dangerous detours. No discipline or willpower required, because discipline and willpower are depletable resources. Anybody who's tried to do something on discipline, like, you're on a diet, chocolate cake comes out. If you've had a rough day at the office, your boss or other people were horrible, you got stuck in traffic, and, maybe your wife was fighting with you, and something else bad happened to you. And then you're at a dinner party or out for a work dinner, and, you've got no discipline or willpower left because you used it all not snapping at your boss. And now the chocolate cake comes out, you're going to devour it. But if you have standards, that I'm the type of person that, like, for me, I don't eat, I eat so early. I eat at like 4. I've eaten before. So I'm doing this podcast at 4 p.m. Vancouver time. I've already had dinner. And so I usually finish dinner at 4:30. I just don't eat past 4:30. That's my standard. I don't do that. And so if you're the type of person, I just don't eat chocolate cake on school nights. You could say that. I don't drink on school nights. That was the one thing that I used to do too when I was a social drinker, meaning I don't drink if I have to go to work the next day. I would only be a social drinker if I didn't have to work the next day. So it's just labeling yourself positively and building the right identity. You no longer require the willpower and discipline. Now, it's, in some cases, you can do this overnight. I had a friend of mine who, he heard me talking about these things, and he's like, I used to watch a little bit of pornography. I didn't think it was that, that harmful. But then I realized, like, that's below my standards. And he quit overnight, like cold turkey. And I have had friends who have gone from binge drinking to no drinking overnight because they changed their identity. In most cases, that's not how it works. You have to build the effortless discipline systems, give yourself some confidence, and then you're able to completely shift your identity and say, I'm not the type of person who watches pornography. I'm not the type of person who binge watches Netflix. I'm not the type of person who drinks alcohol. I'm not the person who smokes. I'm not the type of man who smokes weed. Eventually, and then it's like so strong. And the standards, eat discipline for breakfast. Because the joking story that I use in the book is, imagine you took 2 men. One was a vegan and one ate a normal diet. And you put them in a room for 12 hours with no food. And then after 12 hours, when they're both starving, you put in a cheeseburger in front of each of them. And you told them not to eat it. Try not to eat it. The vegan would never eat it because he has standards. And his standards would help him succeed. Whereas the guy who eats cheeseburgers normally is just relying on willpower and discipline not to eat the cheeseburger in front of him. He's going to break down, no matter how much discipline he has, because standards eat discipline for breakfast. And that's the message that we want to get across to people is, at the end of the day, discipline's good. It'll get you out of some bad situations, but there's levels above it that you can go to where you no longer need discipline, and you also won't get sucked into the dark side.
I love that. You mentioned systems, and obviously almost like the identity change that has to happen for guys to make this switch. What's the initial kind of systems that you would look to install in someone straight away?
Yeah, so there's really 3 super strong systems, because we want to keep it as simple as possible. And these are the 80-20 of systems. And the first one does most of the heavy lifting, and it's simply elimination. So you think of any bad habit that a guy might have: looks at his phone too much, looks at pornography, drinks alcohol, binge eats a certain food. Like, I used to binge eat chocolate covered almonds. That was my vice. And, until I was able to use systems to stop that, and then eventually set higher standards, if I had 1 or 2 drinks, I'm eating a bag of chocolate covered almonds, like 30% of the time. So I don't do that anymore. But everybody's got a bad habit. And You beat it through generally elimination. So if you check your phone too much, as my co-author of the book, Daniel Woodrum, did, he used something called the Opal app. The Opal app is used by over 4 million people. It's one of the most popular blocking apps that can be used on an iPhone. And it's very simple. You can set it up so that your phone will not allow you to access texts, email, social media, YouTube, all that sort of stuff for a certain amount of time. And so my co-author, Daniel Woodrum, sets it from 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. is his work time. So he blocks the phone he can't use it. Now he can use his laptop, but he doesn't have a problem accessing, going on social media and stuff on his laptop. He actually just focuses on his work. And then from 5 p.m. till 8 p.m., he does the same thing with his Opal app so that it doesn't interfere with family time. So that even if he has his phone beside him, no messages are going to come through. He can't, even go onto Instagram, whatever it is. And so it's elimination. Discipline is really best achieved through subtraction. So get the chips and alcohol out of the house. Block, use some type of website blocker that does not allow access to XXX websites. If you have friends that send you pornography links, block them. If you go on Instagram and you start looking at girls doing, hip thrusts, and that leads you down a bad road, stop looking at that stuff on Instagram. Block yourself from Instagram, and you eliminate the things, just like getting the alcohol out of the house. If it's not there, you can't drink it. Now that's the first step, and it'll go a long way. But the second step you need to do, because that eliminates the bad habit, is when you eliminate a bad habit, there's this void, right? Like, at 8 o'clock, I used to come home and always have a drink and sit down and watch Netflix. And, sometimes I watched 8 episodes, so it's a problem. Not that I did, but I'm just saying you might. And so now we said, okay, I'm not going to go home and have a drink and watch 8 episodes of Netflix. But then you get home and you're like, what do I do? I don't know what to do. Because there's this void. And if you don't have a good habit to replace the bad habit, you just going to go back and default to the bad habit. So you got to make sure there's a good habit. And so the second system is planning and preparation. And there's some planning and preparation and elimination and avoiding the bad habit, but plan and prepare to do something better. I was once a binge drinker, so that was a real bad habit that I had. And so I eliminated alcohol from my house, and I eliminated myself going to toxic environments. I didn't go to bars, and I didn't go out with certain people who only were drinking buddies. But I had other friends who were my drinking buddies, but I didn't want to lose them as friends. So I had to better plan and prepare to be social with them outside of drinking hours and environments. So with my best friend, it was hikes on Saturday morning. Drinking didn't start till the middle of the afternoon. So I would hike with him in the morning and then say, see ya, or going to the gym, or, going out on a weeknight with him because he didn't drink during the week. So I can go and see him then. So it's just better planning and preparation to keep my social relationships going, but without being in a drinking environment. And so those are the first 2 systems. And then finally, the third system after elimination and preparation is connection, what we refer to as accountability. And if you really want to move mountains in your life, being accountable to somebody you deeply do not want to disappoint is the missing link. It's the missing link. Because if you have this goal of like, listen, I don't want to drink and watch Netflix during the week, but you keep that goal to yourself, you're the easiest person to let down. So you might say, I'm going to keep the alcohol out of the house, and I'm going to plan to go to the gym instead. But there's still going to be some night where, like, you finish your workout early, you go home, and you're like, man, I don't know if you can do this in Australia, but in Canada, you can just order alcohol online, kind of like DoorDash. And, so I don't have alcohol in the house, but I can just order it. And the next thing you know, you're slipping into a bad habit. Nobody knows because you don't have to check in with anybody. But if you have to check in with somebody who you're not going to lie to, that's the missing link. So, you get home from the gym early and you're like, man, I could just DoorDash some alcohol and then watch some Netflix. But next morning, I got to text Rich and say, did I drink alcohol last night? If yes, why did I do that? And I have to answer that. Okay, I'm not going to, and that, man, that changed my life in so many ways because, this Bedros Keuilian guy who I've mentioned already, I look up to this guy like a big brother, and he and I have been business partners and friends. And, I've been his coaching client. He's been my coaching client. He's a very successful dude. He actually did a tour in Australia late last year. He did some speaking over in Sydney and Melbourne, I think. And I knew that I had to check in with him on a regular basis. And even when I didn't have to formally check in with him, I always kept his voice in my head. And I operate as, all the time as if he's watching. And when you have that type of mentor relationship and that connection, accountability relationship, it'll keep you on the straight and narrow to do the things that you are meant to do, because you don't have time to throw your life away.
I love that. On that note, do you have, and obviously you've got Bedros, do you have is it just Bedros, or do you have an inner circle of guys who are like, you know what, this is my pack almost that I've formed over the years?
I do, in a way. I'm not there's a lot of, men's communities and a lot of great male influencers who attract certain tribes and stuff. I'm not really a tribal dude. And so I kind of have introverted tendencies. I like to do things on my own. I certainly respond to the high standards my wife has for me, and Bedros. And there's a few other guys, but I'm not regularly contacting them. I'll go, 3 months without messaging most of my friends. I'm just, I'm like, that's the kind of guy I am. So I'm not checking in with them on a regular basis, but I run a coaching program with business owners in it. Hundreds of business owners. Some of them come to our events 3 times per year. Some of them we just talk to on email. We have a school community of 1,100 people. And I mentioned this in the book as well, that there's a guy named Justin Kahn, and I believe he started Twitch TV or whatever that, video game platform is, where people video them watching or playing video games. and in 2007, this guy, he had a website called justin.tv, and he had a camera on his head, on a hat, that was on 24 hours a day. And I thought it was the most incredible concept, because imagine if there was a camera on you 24 hours a day. And I live my life like that. Plus, I have the added, if Bedros could see me doing this, and that's enough for me. To me, that's all I need, because even when I was recording the audiobook of The Dark Side of Discipline, it's challenging to talk for 3 or 4 hours. And not only do you have to talk, but you have to talk perfectly. So if I say the word wonderful or wonderful, and it sounds like wonderful instead of wonderful, I got to go back and redo the sentence. So you got to talk perfectly and articulate every word. And it's like a mental marathon. And so you get kind of exhausted. And I took a break in the middle of it. But there was a period where the other thing is, when I do audiobooks, I have my radio voice. So this is Craig Ballantyne reading The Dark Side of Discipline. So I talk like that for most of it. But there was a point where I was exhausted, and I was starting to use my what my nephew calls my motivational YouTube video voice, which is what I'm talking now. And I had to self-correct myself, because I was like, the people listening to this audiobook deserve the best. And even though I wanted to just keep going, I made myself go back and reread a section of the book, because I got out of that smooth radio voice, even though I didn't want to, right? I just wanted to be done with this thing, because as a person with introverted tendencies, a special kind of hell is talking. And so for me, talking for 4 hours was not the most fun in the world. I love doing podcasts, by the way, because it's more rambling, but to talk structured for 4 hours, it was tough. But there were points where, I could feel my mentors on my shoulder saying, bro, come on, you can do better than this. And I think, and that's the higher standards, right? If you have these higher standards that you have for yourself, you don't necessarily need to be checking in with people all the time. Because again, in our book, it goes, we build the effortless discipline systems first, which then lead to the identity shift, which then allow you to build higher standards. So you have to have generally the accountability to get you out of the dark places. But then eventually, like, you could be on your own with high standards. And that's really what it's about.
I love that. It kind of feeds what we were talking about before. It feeds into this part, this question. So you describe something called the doom loop, where guys sabotage themselves and stay stuck in patterns of distraction, procrastination, and avoidance. What's the fastest way to break that loop? Is there a fast way to go bang?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, to describe the doom loop a little bit more, it's where you find yourself repeating behaviors. It's like binge drinking every weekend, or binge watching Netflix. Like every night you go home and you're like, I'm not going to watch Netflix tonight. Next thing you know, you're like 4 episodes deep into something, and it's this doom loop, or it's this doom loop of behaviors in getting angry or binge eating. And the doom loop needs a circuit breaker, right? So if you think of like a loop, like you keep on going through it. It's like Groundhog Day, as if you've ever watched the American movie, where it's like repeated over and over and over again. And what do we need? We need to stick something in there. Like, when somebody's bicycling and you stick something in there and they flip, right? So what can you do? And what I've found is that planning and preparation is the circuit breaker. So if last night, man, woke up, you're so tired because you were up an hour or two past your bedtime because you watched too much Netflix last night. You got to plan and prepare now for tonight so it doesn't happen again. And it might be the extreme. We've had clients who have given their Netflix, allowed somebody else to change their Netflix password so they can't watch it. Right. I've had a client who had his personal assistant change his Gmail password every morning, so he couldn't check his email until she texted the new password to him at 5:00 every night, and he was allowed to check his email. Those are extreme examples, but if you're in a doom loop, you have to apply something like that. You have to, because conventional behavior is not stopping you. You need an intervention. And the intervention is in the form of a circuit breaker, which is in the form of planning and preparation, which allows you to not only stop doing the bad behavior, but try a good behavior. And then we need to kind of wedge ourselves in there and open it up so that we go from darkness into light. And just every day you wedge it a little bit more, you get further away from the mistake. And you get closer to the behavior that you want, the standard, the identity that you are aiming for in life. And when you can, if you're into a bad habit, bad as I've been. So listen, the reason why I was able to write this book is because I've had all the bad habits, and I had all the bad habits. I don't have them anymore, but I had them. And, some of these things, it might take you a year to master and completely rid it from your life. But you're going to be a whole lot better off in a year from now than if you leave it in your life. And so the doom loops are difficult, but you can escape them and go from that doom loop into what I call the virtuous cycle, which is where every good behavior feeds the next good behavior, whereas every bad behavior feeds the next bad behavior. There's a phrase in America, and I'm not sure if you guys have it down there, but people will say, "Oh, I got to get something out of my system. I got to go to Vegas one more time and binge drink with the boys. Just get the last one out of my system." But you don't get something out of your system by doing it. You ingrain it deeper into your system when you do it. And every time you say, if you've ever said that, if you're going to do something, get it out of your system, you're actually making it stronger, and you will do it more often the more you try and get it out of your system. And so that's the doom loop. The more that you do the doom loop, the more you stay in it. It's just the way that we're wired, and you have to kind of circuit break that wiring so you get out of it.
I love it. Thanks for sharing. You've worked with thousands of men. What's the most common discipline mistake men make when it comes to their marriage?
When it comes to their marriage, I would say that they just don't respect boundaries. And whether it's a boundary that the wife has asked, whether it's a boundary that they've set together. I had a client, and man, I tried so hard to help. I had meetings in their house. We had a whiteboard. We built his calendar. We all agreed that at this time of day, he's going to come up from the basement office. He's going to leave his phone downstairs. I left the house, and probably the next week, the boundaries were disobeyed. And listen, I get it. I want to work all the time. I love my work. I love to write, and a writer's work is never done because there's always something else to write about. And I just wanted, I'd be happy to do it 16 hours a day. But there's more important things than that. And so my wife and I have been together since, just before 2020. And when I met her, I was working all crazy hours. And I first had to set the boundary of 6 o'clock, the phone goes away. And now it's earlier, and now it's more often. And you have to just build yourself up. But if you are going to set boundaries and communicate boundaries with your wife and say, hey, this is, I'm going to do this, you have to respect those boundaries. Because when you don't, first of all, you are breaking a promise you've made to yourself, and that will decrease your self-confidence. Now you're breaking a promise that you've made to your wife, which is going to hurt the relationship. And if you're breaking a promise that affects the kids, man, everybody's getting hurt by not respecting boundaries. And it's difficult, again, when you're ambitious, when you have a lot of things you want to do, when, if you're new to the relationship, if it's an early marriage, like 2 years ago, maybe you were all the time, you were a free man doing all this stuff, all selfishly according to whatever you wanted. Things have to change. And this is what you signed up for. And you got to respect those boundaries. So you have to agree upon them, communicate them, and respect them. And when you do that, everyone's going to be a whole lot happier.
Love it. Craig, I've got one last question for you.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in this one. If you could go back 10 years and have a 5-minute conversation with your younger self, what's the one piece of advice you'd give it?
10 years. Well, I wasn't that stupid 10 years ago. So I would say if I could accelerate the timeline and, maybe go back 20 years. Cause I don't, when I was 10 years ago, I don't know what I would say to myself 10 years ago, but 20 years ago, I would tell myself, stop drinking alcohol and learn how to be social without alcohol. That's probably man, if I could go back, I would just shake myself. And the other thing was, learn to do sales. And also 20 years ago, start jujitsu now, because taking up jujitsu at 47 years old is just does not work. It's not an old man's game. It's an old man's game if you've been doing it for 25 years and you're like the chess master, but being a spazzy white belt at 46 or 47 is no bueno.
I love it. Craig, where can people find you, follow you, and dive deeper into your work? And more importantly, how can they get their hands on The Dark Side of Discipline?
Yeah, so the darksideofdiscipline.com will put you on the wait list. The book is not yet on Amazon, but it will be soon. And when it's on Amazon, it'll be hard copy, paperback, ebook, audiobook, all the good things. But darksideofdiscipline.com to be alerted for when it's available. And then if anybody has any follow-up questions, hit me up on Instagram at Real Craig Ballantyne. Real Craig Ballantyne.
Appreciate it, mate, so much. Thank you for your time, effort, and everything you do and putting out in the community and the world. And hopefully we'll cross paths again at some point.